Okay, so domestic abuse approximately is about 10% of all our incidents that we attend within West Yorkshire, and obviously we do not underestimate the effects of those people involved in domestic abuse, but also the children that are also involved in domestic abuse, and that's something again we've been really keen to push as a police service in making sure that we absolutely capture the child's demeanour within those domestic abuse, and that was an area that was cited in recent pilot inspections as really done significant improvements on that, and I think we should be proud of that. And obviously the provisions that we can put in place for those children where they've been identified involved in domestic abuse, obviously it goes on. So we do recognise that many of the victims actually do suffer in silence before reporting to the police or third-party agencies, and recently we've seen the introduction of the coercive and controlling behaviour legislation. And again, this is another welcome piece of legislation that has filled a little bit of a loophole where we can actually provide that extra support really for victims and also prosecute offenders who do this particular horrific crime. Really, it's where physical abuse is not necessarily the outcome there. And again, we've continued to audit the policing districts in respect of this, and we've undertaken two peer reviews, one with South Yorkshire Police and also Lancashire Police to identify best practice. The data, you've seen an increase in the number of incidents this year, and I think there may be several factors that are linked to this, and I think that we've obviously much improved in terms of our crime recording and crime data integrity, and also an increase in confidence for victims to come forward. Historically, many moons ago, victims didn't come forward around domestic abuse, and more incidents would take place before. So I think we should be seeing that as a positive. We've also expanded our integrated offender management teams within the policing district to incorporate domestic abuse offenders to tackle those persistent offenders who go on to abuse multiple partners or the same partner multiple times. And again, this is a more of a preventative approach that we've done, we've now introduced, and it's starting to see some green shoots around some of those offending. We've seen an improvement in the attrition rate, and I think that's a real positive. All safeguarding units now deal with standard, medium and high risk cases within the policing districts, and again that's a real positive step in terms of providing that victim care and operational support. Support for victims and prosecuting offenders. However, occasionally, sometimes demand does actually outstrip policing districts, and for those reasons we may have to allocate to other officers. So your trying to think of the terminology there. So prisoner handling teams might have to pick up some of the overspill in terms of those, but those are risk assessed before they're actually allocated out to those officers other than the specialist officers. But primarily the starting point will always be all these investigations sit within the safeguarding units. I also think that transforming summary justice has had a real improvement around the improvement in the attrition rate as well. I think that's a real positive. Our arrest rate is at the top end of the scale nationally. I think we're near at 60%, and nationally the figure actually is quite wide. It varies from 20% up to 80% in terms of arrest rates at domestic abuse. And again, I think that there's a lot of recording issues to get the definitive actually what is the national average around arrest rates, etc., which can be quite complicated.
There's also a necessity test to fulfil the requirements of before you actually arrest somebody as well. So that could have an influence on those.
And we've also seen that the arrest of suspects is not always the positive outcome that a victim wishes, but it's a consideration, but not the determining outcome in respect to that investigation. So we've done ongoing work. So again, I sound like a giddy child here, but again, we've got some really exciting work that's taking place around domestic abuse. We've got the whole systems approach, which is the Northumbria-led bid, which is part and parcel of the Police Transformational Fund, which we're in collaboration with Durham, Cleveland, North Yorkshire and Humberside and that. We're still just awaiting confirmation of the 2-year funding. That's been put on hold because of the elections, I'm told. But that bid comprises of four key things really. Effective working with the criminal justice system, safeguarding the schools, partnership working with the Civil and Family Court, and the multi-agency victim support and offender management. And again, we're well on the way to delivering some parts of that. One thing that has really made a real impact straight away was actually the introduction in January this year, where we have domestic abuse cars. That's jointly resourced by police and the Independent Domestic Abuse Service. And we've seen some real positives, both police and neighbours have, and disclosures from victims that perhaps not necessarily would have been made at the time. And just to give you sort of some of the figures that as a result of that, so the officers completed shifts over a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the 82 shifts that were completed, we had 204 deployments and 130 victims accepting follow-up support, which is real. I think it's a real great outcome. That we've obviously got in the process of doing an evaluation of that, again, which will form part of the wider systems approach. We're fortunate enough to have Paul Hill, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who's working with that as the project manager on that, former board manager at Bradford, and he's doing some fantastic work with that. Operation Encompass, again, this was cited by HMIC as good practice in the recent field inspections. We're doing, this is basically information sharing when a domestic abuse takes place, that we share that information with schools at the earliest opportunity so they can pick up and provide support to children at that opportunity. We've got Bradford, Leeds, Calderdale all in there, and Kirklees and Wakefield just about there to go with that. And again, that's great, that it's really positive. That. As I mentioned, the coercive and controlling behaviour, we've over 2,000 officers now that have been trained. We're still continuing to roll out the training. We're looking to expand that once we've completed response officers. We'll then extend that to our DCRs, public inquiry counters, etc. staff, and as wide as possible, so that they're all familiar with that legislation. Calderdale have had a great result. They were the first and the fourth to get a conviction for that, and the gentleman got a 4-year sentence, and to say that the maximum sentence for that is 5 years. And ironically, this morning, I've just had a conversation this morning, they've just had another one, and the gentleman's got 32 months for similar sort of offences, which again is fantastic.
Was that in Calderdale again?
Again in Calderdale, yeah, again, same officer as well, which is brilliant. Again, a real positive that was picked up by the HMIC was around the daily risk assessment meetings. Now, this again is based on the principles similar to what we developed around the CSE hubs, so that lifetime, quick time information sharing. We expanded to daily risk assessments around domestic abuse, so all the police and districts have got one. Some are more mature than others, and we're obviously looking to make sure that they're all, providing that consistent service across West Yorkshire. Partners that are involved in that, because of some of the volumes that we've seen in some of the districts, they're still maintaining the 2- and 4-week MARAT meetings just to make sure that no victim is missed or anything like that. So, but again, that quick turnover in terms of information sharing is obviously providing extra support and making sure victims are on board, and we'll prosecute offenders at the earliest opportunity. Quickly more. So, body-worn videos, again, that's again another great asset to providing victimless prosecutions. Working with CPS on that, again, obviously stops the victim having to go to court if we've got the overwhelming evidence captured on a body camera. The Choices Perpetrator Programme, which I know that Commissioner, you funded that. Yep. Again, we've seen some real positives in that 80% compliance of those that have completed the course, and again, another positive outcome is that 78% have not gone on to reoffend during a specific time period, which again is fantastic. The domestic violence protection orders, DVPOs, DVPNs, currently heard at Leeds Magistrates Court. I think we can do more on these. An opportunity for me as the Safeguarding Lead to continue to push that with districts and for them to seek outcomes around domestic abuse protection orders. We've put a bid in to the Violence Against Women and Girls funding, which I know again has been put on hold with a view to having a dedicated team to present those cases at Leeds Magistrates Court, again just to professionalise that process. But if it's unsuccessful, we'll look at other opportunities around that and how we can achieve that as we move forward. We're also engaged with part of the governance unit involved in a deep dive with the criminal justice victims and witness boards, Bradford is the nominated deep dive location where we're looking at domestic abuse cases from cradle to grave almost, in respect of those cases. So where calls comes in, that is the starting point, and actually the outcome at court once that's completed. We've have a DCI from Cambridgeshire who's just come and done a peer review on some of our cases within West Yorkshire, so we're obviously looking at learning opportunities around some of those. So again, real positives. Domestic abuse internal campaign. Again, this is something rather unique that, again, as a force, we should be fairly proud of. That we've done, which was launched in November of 2016, and this provides a confidential reporting mechanism for police officers and staff who may be subject to domestic abuse themselves, who don't want to report internally. So we've got agreement from both North and South Yorkshire that they would initially investigate those crimes on our behalf, which again it gives that confidence for people to report.
Is that a reciprocal arrangement?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that again, that's great. And obviously the audits we continue to do around domestic abuse and look for areas for improvement. One of the things I should mention around strategic risk implications, obviously the arrest rate is decreasing. However, West Yorkshire arrest rate currently stands at 59.7%, but as I discussed, the range is from 20% to 80%. So some of the issues around around voluntary attendance, where officers are rather doing voluntary attendance rather than arrest, and a victim-led approach may delay the response in respect of the initial arrest opportunities for that, so that arrest that Mr Foster mentioned. And the number of investigations being taken to CPS is decreasing. And again, this is not something that's particularly unique to West Yorkshire. Again, that's seen across the board. And Deputy Chief Constable Rolf, who leads that from the MPCC's point of view, is looking at trends around that and workshops of how we can develop that much better. Coercive and controlling behaviour legislation still being used, and again, officers just to continue to push that from the central. The IDVA service funding, I think potentially to be reduced by the government, which does obviously increase the number of those that are commissioned services within West Yorkshire, who are all heavily and already committed and perhaps can't provide the over and above support around the victims for that. And the DASH risk assessment, which again, this is something that has been continually reviewed by academia nationally. A lot of work done by the College of Policing, and the current DASH assessment doesn't perhaps necessarily capture as much detail around stalking and harassment, but more so around coercive and controlling behaviour. And again, that's something that we're looking to assist Deputy Chief Constable Rolf around how we can develop that.
And Darren alluded to the DASH form including the demeanour of child. It also includes capturing the voice of the child as well.
Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot. There's a lot of information within that report. I'll just start by asking, firstly on page 2, the repeat victim rate looks high. Is there a particular reason for that, do you think?
Again, I don't think there's one specific reason for the victim rate being that particular high. We do have the integrated offender management teams that are making positive interventions on couples who have repeat cases. Some of our civil orders or breaches of restraining orders, actually, when we record those crimes, actually we have to generate another dash, so that actually generates another repeat rate. And again, that's direction from the MPCC that we should continue to do that to show the volumes. So those, whilst those positive measures are being taken, it almost transforms into a negative, as seen as a repeat rate. So we're conscious of it, and we're continuing monitoring. And through the local accountability meetings, we look and review high repeat victims rates and suspect repeat rates as well as part of the process.
Yeah, I mean, I know you referred to it in the report, the use of body-worn cameras. Is that something that over time you will see hopefully having an impact in terms of the evidence that's captured?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I think the difference it's going to make is twofold. First and foremost, it captures evidence at the first available opportunity when we first attend. The second is I think it will actually help us in terms of potential victimless prosecutions as you move forward, because we won't necessarily be solely relying on the victim at some point later in time being able to attend court.
Yeah, yeah.
Massively influences the other pleas. You know, when we're providing the evidence at court, the plea tend to plead guilty as soon as they see the evidence, even though it's been pled to them during interview.
Yeah.
I think it's a real positive, is that the body worn videos.
Okay, well, we'll obviously look to monitor the body worn video evidence over time. Also, though, again, you touched on it, but the attrition rate has improved according to the figures. Is there any particular comment around why that might be?
I think as I mentioned in the report, the transformational summary justice courts have become more efficient and effective now, and I think safeguarding teams across the force that are now also dealing with the high medium standard cases are seeing improvement in terms of that professional approach to domestic abuse, and obviously we're seeing it as a priority that that we'll look for alternatives for perpetrators and victims as well moving forward. So that's why we're seeing the drop off in the attrition. And victims did research, I think, early sort of green shoots around the cars that we've got, the domestic abuse cars, obviously improving on that. And I think that'll probably play out a little bit further down the line at the moment in terms of the attrition, but I think it's a real positive again for us as that.
So it's more around the process has been more efficient, but I guess the quality of the cases that are put before.
Yes, and also, there's a lot of work, supported by your office around supporting victims to make sure that they feel able to attend court as and when their case goes before the magistrate. I think that in particular is probably one of the crucial bits that is potentially improved on that attrition rate, which will again be supported by the rollout of body-worn video, where we will actually be able to see how that victim was on the actual occasion when they made the report, rather than waiting for several months down the line, by which time a victim may well feel more able to present themselves at court, but you won't get that same emotional impact as you do when you first attend the incident. So I think it's going to be very powerful.
Yeah, okay.
A combination really of specialist teams, standard operating procedures around the quality of the investigations, the support from victims, but also with the transforming summary justice is getting the trials to court very quickly. So you've got that opportunity to work with the victim over a shorter period of time to get it to court as opposed to a lengthy period of time.
Yeah, because I mean, I think we know, don't we, that if these cases are dragged out over prolonged periods, exactly, there's a much greater risk of victims deciding to drop out of the proceedings. So yeah, that's good. Yeah. On page 3, and again you mentioned it, Darren, in relation to the daily risk assessments when districts assess domestic abuse incidents and undertake that with other partner organisations. Only some areas have retained the MARAC process. What's happening in the other areas?
I think it's where we've got the volume in some of the districts that they maintain that MARAC process, simply just to make sure, until we move to the full daily risk assessment meetings. We have a vast number of partners, particularly around Leeds, have up to 15 partners that attend some of their daily risk assessment meetings. Yeah,
I went into one of their meetings about a month ago. So
there's a bit of a backstop and a quality assurance that they make sure that they do have the MARAC process still in place. The volumes that are not necessarily played out, so Calderdale, who have probably the lowest number of domestic abuse cases across West Yorkshire, that they're more proficient now in terms of the process around dealing with those cases quickly. So it's and when we looked at that, we're going out to assess that to make sure that the victims and offenders are being dealt with. So as part of the audit process, we'll assess those to make sure that they are proficient and effective in terms of assessing risk and making sure those interventions are being put in place by police and partner agencies. I think it's just due to sheer volume that some of the districts cannot condense it into one meeting. You know, some of them do go on for several hours. Into, well, as you know, Leeds will go on for maybe 4 or 5 hours.
So it is purely to do with volume rather than necessarily a conscious decision to do away with the MARAC.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, it's some of the districts have moved away from MARAC, and that's been assessed to say actually your processes that you've got in place are proficient enough to make sure that you don't have to have the two weekly, the fortnightly, monthly MARAC meetings. Whereas Leeds, they need to continue with theirs.
Yeah.
I've asked the same question because of this
Yeah.
issue that from an HMIC perspective,
Exactly. Yeah.
there might be an inconsistency. This is about making sure that assessments get made.
Yeah.
They've just chosen to do it in Leeds through having a whole day's process, looking at several cases rather than as they come along, which is
That's
what
right.
everybody else does.
Yeah.
But the assessment process is
It's
the
still
same.
exactly the same.
Okay. And then finally, I know I've touched on it previously, but it's just regarding how the Victims Code is being embedded within the neighbourhood policing teams with regards to domestic abuse.
Again, we look to do that through assessment and making sure that the victims are kept up to date. We assess those and making sure how they are kept up to date. Looking at so when we do a quality assurance check on domestic abuse, part of the process will be looking how is that victim being kept up to date, how is that victim kept up to date, and also setting out procedures in terms of they will, based on the victim's wishes, how they will be. You know, do you want to be contacted by email, text, or anything? So we will do that as part of that assessment. As part of the inspection process to make sure that they are compliant with the Victims Code and that the victims are satisfied.
Yeah.
And as a backstop to that, we've also got the work we're doing with Leicestershire Police, who are doing some of the ring backs around domestic abuse. And again, that's providing us some data around satisfaction and confidence around domestic abuse cases as well, which again is really positive.
Okay, and you're confident that that's working well?
I think it's working well. Yeah. I mean, again, that's something when we're picking up an issue, we immediately flag that up to the district lead to make sure that they're compliant with that.
Yeah, it was just that it's quite a stark figure, isn't it, at the outset of the report when we say that 10% of all incidents are domestic abuse related, and it's a pretty stark figure, isn't it? Still, but no, thanks very much for those reports. And again, I think it does demonstrate to me the amount of activity and work and joined up work that is going on. But clearly, because of the nature and the vulnerability side of things with these areas around child sexual exploitation, abuse and domestic abuse, I know it's something that we're not complacent about at all, and we will always try and strive to improve and support victims and tackle perpetrators wherever possible. But thank you very much for those reports, and at that point I think we'll just take a quick break. Thanks.
Mark, can I just say that, Darren, you've got to be at a meeting in Calderdale at what time?
5 days.
5.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering whether either a very, very, very quick break, or we press on with Darren's 2 reports and then have a break and pick up with the other 2 after that.
Yeah, I know. I was just giving the opportunity for a comfort break.
I'm happy for Darren to continue to count
Okay.
through.
It's still the Calderdale
We'll
Council.
edit this out, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean,
Thank you, Isabel.
So the camera's still rolling, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we will, clearly edit it to. All right. Well, the taskmaster has spoken. So.
Definitely editing that bit out.
I think we're responding to the needs of Calderdale, aren't we?
Yes.
I think
To do that too.
Yes. Okay then. Well, right. Thank you. So the next item then is number 7, which is honour-based abuse, and again there is a cover sheet there, just sort of highlighting the sort of priority and strategic work from my office that is taking place, and of course, as we talked about previously, we do work closely with organisations like Karma Nirvana and Staying Put, who specialise and get involved in tackling honour-based abuse and supporting victims, of course. And obviously I recently spoke at an event that Karma Nirvana hosted over in Leeds a few weeks ago that was very well attended, and sort of again highlighted some of the real issues that we face within some of our communities here in West Yorkshire. So again, I'll hand over to you to speak to your report. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner. Again, so honour-based abuse, I think it's widely accepted that this is still a vastly underreported area for us. We try, when we take the training with the officers and staff Force Training School, is the old that I used to use for CSE, we've got to hunt for clues really, you know, looking for those pieces of the jigsaw that actually might lead us to an investigation around. So we have to be very proactive in terms of our response around identifying victims of honour-based abuse and identifying those offenders. So again, looking for those clues and those pieces of the jigsaw to make the you know, pull the wider picture together. The number of incidents up to February of this year, we've had 198 incidents reported. 69 of those related to domestic incidents, and we have recorded 24 forced marriage protection orders. And in that, we've also had 21 child protection incidents that we would term relating to honour-based abuse. We've seen a slight decrease from the previous years. So 2014-2015, we had 80. 2015 to 2016, we had 73 incidents recorded, so approximately about an 8% reduction there. We have undertaken a problem profile around this, and again, because the data and information is relatively low, we're still going to continue to refresh that as we move forward, and our intelligence department obviously will work closely with those, and we'll look to refresh that later on this year. Interestingly, Kirklees district has the most recorded incidents at 35.6%, and Wakefield are the only district in the force to have not recorded any honour-based abuse incidents. Are officers becoming more aware? Then I would like to say to that, yes. One of the areas as a force we've seen a reduction is maybe around intelligence, but this is one area that has actually seen an increase in intelligence submissions, and we've seen a 10.8% increase around the intelligence. Again, from a policing perspective, I think we're really doing quite a bit around honour-based abuse, really something that I'm quite proud of. We've developed an action plan. This is based on the HMIC inspection around hidden crimes, which looks to develop the work and the work being carried out across the force. There was 3 sort of key recommendations for the police as a result of that. Recommendation 9, 10 and 11. 9 was around improving awareness with officers. Improvement 10 was around the flagging of those crimes, and 11 was around making sure that the police services have clear policies, and we've completed all of those in respect and reported to Commander Matt Chister, who is the lead for the MPCC on that. Our collaboration is improving around this particular area of business. We've got a steering group that now meets quarterly, and again, I mentioned it earlier, but it's something that has evolved and is continuing to evolve. And we have really good representation from your office, Commissioner. We've got CPS that are regular tenders, we've got local authority leads, we've got Karma Nirvana, and we're looking to develop good practice and tackle any sort of emerging issues as a result of that. We have also been the instigators of reinvigorating and kick-starting the regional group on this, and West Yorkshire Police lead the regional group on that now, and again that's something we can be quite proud of. In February of this year, Mr Foster signed off the joint protocol between CPS relating to forced marriage and honour-based abuse, so again that's a real positive. We've continued to do the audits, and those audits that we undertook in September 2016 and March 2017 sort of did indicate to us that, and this has been feedback, that officers are improving in terms of their awareness around that, and we did see a significant improvement with officers in 2017. We've revitalise and improve our standard operating procedures, and we're also rewriting our force policy in respect of this. Training, we've done an awful lot around training with this. We've developed 1-minute guides, which I believe is attached to the report for DCR operators and the customer contact centres. We've done specialist training for officers and a 3-day course for champions within safeguarding. We've also undertaken training with Safer Schools officers, and Carmen Havana deliver training now on the foundation training for police officers, and we're obviously supporting the Force Training School with that training. But the Force Training School has also offered up additional training slots really for officers as part of that foundation training, so we're increasing the numbers that are actually seeing inputs around Carmen Havana, so again we're raising awareness across the force. On the back of domestic homicide review, we have developed an induction pack now that covers all disciplines relating to safeguarding. We'll hope, as we move forward, that we'll hope that induction pack will be electronic, but we've uploaded that onto the West Yorkshire Police intranet site, and again that's a point of reference for officers new to the organisation or new staff to the organisation. But this will be given out to people who actually do join the organisation at the starting point, but again it will be used as a reference point, so again I think that's a real positive. So that covers all force procedures, force policy, standard operating procedures, contacts and pathways where we can refer people to, etc. So again really quite proud of that little bit. We've just in the process and just about there really with developing apps for the handheld devices around safeguarding, so again one push of the button the officers can look at force marriage on a based abuse, etc. And I mentioned about the development of the intelligence portal where partner agencies can submit intelligence direct to force intelligence that we can act upon immediately, so again that's a real forward thinking process that we've got there. And we're also looking at funding streams, and again in very early stages, we'll probably do this post the elections, but looking at the concept of actually developing a governance mash, and that's and I've had these discussions with Simon Assal, who obviously about how we can actually not only have a police, obviously we've got the governance mash, we've got the governance structures sitting that actually goes out and inspects, but actually drawing partners in through funding to look at and inspect the police service to develop those processes moving forward. So not only do we're looking at the process and structure within the police environment, we have partners that can actually complement and support the police service moving forward through this governance match. So again, that's very early stages is that. And I've done some scoping nationally, and again, working with Stuart, we don't think there's anything nationally around that. Again, so I think that's really quite innovative and creative around some of that developments moving forward. And hopefully that will help us provide us with the evidence and continuity around looking for that continual improvement and involvement around some of these key areas. Honour-based abuse is certainly one of those. Strategic risks, we've got to make sure that the officers are aware of the one chance rule, and that's part and parcel of the process, is making sure that we only get one chance with victims around this particular crime, and obviously making sure that we don't compromise the confidentiality through incorrect recording of crimes, etc. And we'll continue to work with partners and communities to develop